Coming up on Outside the Lines, first report.
What a matchup this weekend with LSU and Alabama.
Alabama, LSU.
LSU, Alabama.
The game of the century.
Could be the game of an era.
It's the most anticipated game of the college football season. But for LSU and Alabama, it's overcoming obstacles off the field that have put them in position to reach gridiron glory.
This is going to be a real test and a real challenge.
Both teams are very, very talented.
You best prepare.
For folks in Alabama and Louisiana, tickets to this game will cost a small fortune, and even U.S. senators put a hefty wager on the outcome. We examine the cultural significance of Southern football. Also today, Good Morning America's Robin Roberts visits with Tennessee basketball coach Pat Summitt, who earlier this year announced she was diagnosed with early onset dementia.
What I want to do is get other people to understand if you have dementia, don't be afraid of it.
Despite her setback, Summitt remains focused on the team and earning her 9th national title.
What's the lasting lesson, do you think?
I think there's no excuses. Pat lives by that every day, on the court and off the court.
Pat Summitt's inspirational story and the matchup between number 1 and number 2 in Tuscaloosa. All ahead on Outside the Lines. One versus 2. The numbers provide adequate hype, but add in the names and the anticipation grows with greater hyperbole. LSU and Alabama. Go Tigers, spelled with that Cajun flair and the soothing chorus of Leonard Skinner's home symphony. A mix of Southern love filtered by an intense hatred for the opposition. And while winning is priceless, the ticket is not. After taxes, the median household in Tuscaloosa makes around $31,000. At an average of $500 a pop, gaining access to this game takes real financial planning. Yet neither team could have planned for what led up to this clash.
That is something significantly wicked on the horizon of Tuscaloosa.
This thing looks like it might be over 1/2 mile wide. That is huge.
There it is. Oh, no.
This will be a day that will go down in history.
I told the team, I'm going to challenge you guys, not just to be a team on Saturday in the best of times, but we need to be a team now in the worst of times, and everybody needs to reach out and help somebody else.
Several of our players have visited with the police about events that happened the other night. We want to make sure that our team understands the severity of the issue. This is college football. Two great teams squaring off, something to play for.
I think Alabama and LSU, you're splitting hairs.
They're athletic. They got great speed. They both play a very physical game.
Alabama plays a penetrating defense, but by the same token, LSU's for real.
Their offense is explosive. They're dynamic.
My goodness gracious, are they passing some licks out there?
This is going to be a real test and a real challenge.
Both teams are very, very talented.
It ought to be a heck of a football game.
He may take it the distance. Holy cow, that is just what LSU needed.
A.J. loads up, looks for Bell. He's got it.
Throws it downfield. Randall is there. He's got it. He scores.
Stops. He stutters. He goes around the defense. Touchdown. That was shake and bake. Extra crispy right there.
No shortage of talent on the field in Tuscaloosa Saturday night.
And for more on LSU Alabama, we welcome 3 guests to the program. Glenn Guilbeau, sports writer for the Gannett, Louisiana newspapers. In Oxford, Mississippi, Wright Thompson, ESPN.com senior writer. And in Birmingham, Alabama, Paul Feinbaum joins us. He's the host of the Paul Feinbaum Radio Network. Now, both teams have overcome different kinds of adversity to reach this stage. And for Alabama, stand at the corner of McFarland Boulevard and 15th Street in Tuscaloosa, and you will see where that April tornado did its damage. Paul, we'll ask you first, what role has this Crimson Tide team played in restoring faith to the community there?
I think it has been tremendous, Steve. Of course, there's a motivation from last year losing to Auburn at Bryant-Denny Stadium, and I think the events of April 27th motivated not only this team, but the community for something like this. This is the game of the century, as I heard you say, and I think for the people of Tuscaloosa, it's finally a chance to exhale for a couple of hours and enjoy themselves, and there hasn't been much of that down here.
Now, right, in a broader sense, how does football influence life in the South?
I mean, it influences everything. I was at Les Miles' radio show 2 weeks ago, and a dad called in sort of distraught that his daughter's wedding was scheduled the day of the LSU-Alabama game, and the Les Miles' answer was, how could you allow that to happen? It's a very common thing when planning weddings to check the football schedule and make sure you're not planning a wedding, the day of a big game. And so I think that's just a tiny window into how every part of people's lives is in some way affected by the gravitational pull of Saturday.
Now, LSU has faced another set of tough circumstances, the suspensions of 3 of its top players earlier this season. Glenn, what's the feeling in Louisiana about this team?
Well, I think it's a lot better now than it was a few weeks ago. A lot of the fans were upset with some with Coach Miles, others with the media when you had the players involved in the bar fight. It ended up being good for LSU because Jordan Jefferson was actually overcharged. They got over that, and then 3 players were suspended a couple of weeks ago for failed drug tests. They've gotten through that, so nothing has happened in a couple of weeks off the field. So I think everybody thinks that this LSU team is the best LSU team ever.
And right, Les Miles, he's faced scrutiny over the past couple years with his clock management. Games against Ole Miss, Tennessee, those stand out. How has he been able to overcome negative perceptions following those games?
Well, I think one, as Gilbo knows very well, I don't think he really cares. And I think that, the clock management, I spent a bunch of time with him last week, and when you're around him, you realize that he's like that in his everyday life. I mean, he's, late to everything in sort of a comical way. And I think that he just acts in a way that's true to himself. And when that serves him well, he is praised. And when it doesn't, such as the losing it when the clock is ticking down, I think it serves him poorly. But I think both are a reflection of who he is.
Well, he may not care, but what about the fan base?
Fan bases, they care when you're winning and they don't when you're losing, and I almost think it has nothing to do with anything you do or how you are. I think that that's part of the Southern football is that, traits are viewed positively when the team is successful and they're viewed negatively when the team is not. So now that they're winning, he's goofy and colorful, and when they're not, he can't run the game. It's like that thing in Bull Durham, when you win 20 in the show, you can let the fungus grow in your shower shoes, and they call you colorful. But right now, it just means you're disgusting. And so I think it's a total reflection of if the team is winning that week.
Speaking of colorful, Glenn, you've called this coaching battle Jimmy Stewart versus Clint Eastwood, with Les Miles being Stewart and Nick Saban being Eastwood. Explain your analogy.
Well, Coach Saban, his personality, he doesn't smile a lot, he doesn't laugh a lot, and he doesn't say a lot. That's kind of how Clint Eastwood is in a lot of his movies. But Clint's real cool, and he wins in the end. But he's kind of sinister. He's kind of edgy, and that's how Nick is. He was born on Halloween, And Les is just a lovable guy, happy-go-lucky. Everybody likes him, kind of like Jimmy Stewart. But in the end, Les has as much courage as anyone. He'll go for it on 4th down. He'll do what it takes to win. So I think it's just kind of a fun comparison. You could say they're like Bo Schembechler and Woody Hayes as well.
Now, Paul, in your opinion, who is more under pressure to win this game?
Well, I think it's Nick Saban because if he loses this game, as Glenn and Wright know, he'll have a losing record against Les Miles, which is pretty extraordinary when you think back to a year ago. One play made a difference in that game, and that would have been the 3rd straight win over LSU and Les Miles for Saban. So really the pressure is on him. The game's in his house. He is the more famous coach, the $5 million a year guy. So I think the weight of the world will be on him. Although watching him on ESPN all week, it certainly hasn't showed.
Right, let's bring you back in here. The national hype, of course, around this game has been huge. Put in perspective, though, what it's like down there.
It's crazy enough that my wife and I are getting in the car in a little bit, and we're driving to Tuscaloosa just to see it tomorrow. It's all anyone's talking about. I was at a bar in Oxford, Mississippi last night, and all anyone was talking about is how to get tickets, and do you have tickets, and are you going to go, and if you're not going to go, where are you going to watch it, and who's going to cook the gumbo, and it's all anyone is talking about.
Who is going to cook the gumbo?
Oh, I think my friend John Currents, who has a restaurant here in Oxford, is going to cook the gumbo, so it will be edible.
All right, Glenn, that's a good story. Well, what's your favorite story that you've heard about this game this week?
Well, LSU's kicker, Drew Alleman, and Alabama's punter, Cody Mandel, they both went to Acadiana High in Lafayette, where there's a lot of good gumbo. Probably better than Oxford, I would say. Right. But anyway, those guys were both off last week, and Cody drove down from Tuscaloosa, and they both went to Acadiana's high school game last Friday night, and they bumped into one another. They're trying to visit, but all these LSU fans started saying, beat Alabama, go LSU, so they finally had to say bye, so they couldn't even talk. And you don't see two guys that are about to play in a game of this magnitude actually meet socially a week before the game.
Absolutely. Paul, what's the best story you've heard about this game this week?
Well, I want to go back to something Wright said about the weddings. What's interesting, this game was supposed to be at 3:30 Eastern time, as everyone knows. So weddings were scheduled for Saturday night, and then, of course, CBS decided 2 weeks ago to put it in prime time. So I think a lot of people are scrambling right now or calling off weddings, which isn't unusual here in Alabama. But probably my favorite story came from a friend of mine that lives in Halifax, Nova Scotia. He's a big college football fan, and he's having about 10 or 15 people watching the game up there. And I think, as everyone knows, that's a long way from Tuscaloosa.
Talk about the importance for the SEC in this game, having, the supremacy 1 versus 2, right, and in terms of how that really influences how this game is perceived down south.
I think everyone down south thinks that this is the national championship game, and the winner will be the person who gets to beat up on the Pac-10 or Big Ten school in January. I mean, I think there really is that perception that two teams are playing for the national championship this Saturday night at Bryant-Denny Stadium.
Glenn, what happens if LSU loses? What's the feeling there?
Well, if LSU loses, they have a good chance of getting back to the national championship game, I think. It'll be a long shot, but if that's ever going to happen, if there's ever a rematch, it's going to come out of this league, and this is the type year it would come out of. LSU would still get to play Arkansas. If some other teams lose, they could move back up to get number 2. I think most of the country would rather see an LSU-Alabama rematch than say, Alabama playing Boise State, or maybe another school. That could happen, but it'll be a hugely disappointing loss for LSU. On the other hand, it could really be something for less, because LSU is going to be better than Alabama next year, I think. Alabama's team is old. LSU's still really young. If they win the national championship this year, they could win a second one either next year or the year after.
All right, from all three of you, I want to get your headline. I mean, all three very good writers, radio personalities. I want a headline for this game leading up to it on Saturday. We'll start with Glenn.
I would say the cyborg machine against the swashbuckling Pirates.
Okay. You want to explain that?
Well, Alabama is very robotic, and they play like a machine. LSU's kind of loose, and they've broken some laws on the side this year, and they have a honey badger on their shoulder who takes what he wants. This is just a wild team on the field. They're not bad off the field, but yet they also don't turn the ball over. Alabama's more close to the vest, and I think that's why LSU's going to win a close game.
All right, Paul, what's your headline?
Well, I've been in the newspaper business 30 years, and fortunately have never had to write a headline, so I'm going to make it pretty simple. If Alabama wins, it's going to be end-of-the-world type block print, Roll Tide.
All right, and Wright Thompson, you get the final word here.
Well, if in the New Orleans Times-Picayune on Sunday morning and that 60-point type with a slammer, it's going to say Tuscaloosa.
Glenn Guilbeau, Wright Thompson, Paul Feinbaum, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for your time.